Hello audience, Mr. Z here. World War I, it was a conflict which rocked the foundations of the old European order and ushered in the beginnings of a new far-right, far-left dynamic that would later leave the communists victorious and locked in battle for global supremacy with the remaining superpower of the old world, the United States. We'll be exploring how this world dynamic would shift had Germany emerged victorious in World War I, instead of Britain and the Entente. But before we move further, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today, World of Tanks, a free-to-play online multiplayer game with a wide array of tanks to play as, beautifully designed environments, and that's right, if you follow the link in the description of this video, it's totally free. Stay tuned until the end of the video if you want to know more, or if you're already sold, that link is waiting for you down in the description. Now, back to the scenario. World War I by 1915 had quickly become a long stalemate, with the western frontier seemingly making no advance, while their push in the east only drew in more foes for Germany. By 1917, Germany would have managed to knock Russia out of the war by stoking internal dissent via the injection of Vladimir Lenin to raise the flames of revolution. However, that very same year, because of a conspiracy to draw Mexico into the war via the Zimmermann telegraph, and the collateral damage of unrestricted submarine warfare, the US entered the war on behalf of France and Britain. The Ottomans would see a tremendous loss to British forces advancing from Iran and Egypt. Bulgaria would face a full-force invasion from Greece, while enough momentum was thrust into France to force Germany to the breaking point, leading to mass internal disorder and ultimately a surrender. In pure hindsight, it's clear that Germany's downfall was the increasing line of enemies put in their path. Germany's history is strewn in the art of war. The German and former Prussian empires were a product of a warrior people, and they were very capable of wiping the floor with both France and Russia. France had nowhere near the capability and manpower of Germany. Russia was nowhere near as industrialized, and at first it seemed these would be Germany and Austria's only true contenders. But Germany, in an act of either full-on foolishness or brazen bravado, to get an advance on the French border, violated Belgian neutrality in an invasion that drew Belgium's ally of Britain into the conflict. Britain, with its trade lines to the United States, would then pull American interests into the crosshairs of Germany, and thus the Allies became a hydra that Germany could not defeat. But all of that could have been averted had Germany simply not invaded Belgium and held their front with France at Alsace-Lorraine, focusing greater effort on toppling Russia before turning back and pushing a full-force invasion against the now exhausted France. Almost like a backwards Schlieffen plan. France would not be able to topple Germany so long as they stood their ground, but Germany could slowly wear away French forces until an invasion from their shared border came closer into reality. In this timeline, Germany simply did not invade Belgium. Instead, their border with France becomes their sole battlefield, while German and Austrian troops invade Russia following the Austrian capture of Serbia. Italy, cajoled by France, enters the war in an attempt to turn the tides of war. However, this only becomes justification for Austria to invade their northern disputed territory. Vladimir Lenin is still sent back to Russia and begins instigating civil unrest, as resentment toward the Tsar continued to grow for only continuing to fight a war that they felt was not theirs. The Ukraine would secede from Russia only months before the revolution broke out and ally itself to Germany, soon bringing the Eastern Front to a close. With that, Germany and Austria redirect their troops to pierce the Western Front, Austria invading through France's undefended border with northern Italy, and Germany finally breaking the French lines for a clear push into Paris. The war ends. French and Italian colonies are divided up between Germany and Austria. Alsace-Lorraine is annexed into Germany's border, as well as Italy as a whole into Austria, while the Baltic states fall to Germany. Austria and the Ottoman Empire would be emboldened by this victory, however were actually tearing away at the seams, and would not last another decade without significant reform. Britain is increasingly wary of the German Empire, given that they developed a growing rivalry prior to World War I. However, now Germany seemingly challenged British dominance in Europe, encouraging Britain to begin strengthening their land army for an expected conflict with Germany in the near future. Russia would have erupted into civil war, with an anarchist faction arising within the Ukraine, communists in the west and south, and scattered White Army factions across the rest of Russia. The majority of the White Army with German support would be united under the direction of Admiral Alexander Kolchak. In our timeline, Kolchak did a fair job of leading the White Army. His dedication was fierce, but his strength less so. See, Kolchak was an admiral, as in a navy commander. Land war wasn't his strong suit, but he made sharp work with what he knew. In this timeline, Germany, the Czechoslovak Legion, and Ukraine lent military aid and direction to Kolchak, supplanting him with a crack team of German and Austrian generals to delegate orders to. Another faction would arise out of Mongolia under the direction of Baron Ungern von Sternberg, a monarchist set on restoring the Romanov dynasty and wiping the communists from Russia. In our timeline, Sternberg was something of a legendary figure, a man who would charge against machine gun fire with little more than a sword and cavalry, always charging first and always striking hard. So effective was he in the field that the Mongolians awarded him the title of Great Khan, and viewed him as the reincarnation of Genghis Khan. In this timeline, with the greater effectiveness of Kolchak's army, Sternberg is able to crush communist forces in the Far East, driving remnants south into China and into the clutches of the Japanese, who had begun expanding into Korea, Eastern Russia, and Manchuria. Bulgaria would, in a sense of ancestral restoration, seek to recreate the old Byzantine Empire in its own image. This had led to an annexation of Greece with protection from Germany against Britain. However, Bulgaria still remained conflicted over Ottoman-held Constantinople, and would need to find a means to restore Tsargrad on its own. The Ottomans, in a bold move following talks with rebels within British Egypt, proceed to invade the region, pulling itself into a war with Great Britain. The Ottomans would call upon Germany to support them in this war. Germany, seeing this as an opportunity to capture Belgium and demonstrate military superiority to Britain, would accept this alliance, and just as soon as the war had ended, it would fire up once again. Germany, White Russia, Mongolia, the Ottomans, and Finland would unite against the Anglo-French-Japanese alliance. Germany had hoped to include Austria, however the old Österreich would collapse under the pressures of numerous ethnic revolts within Italy and the Balkans, leaving it only a fraction of its former territory. France was in no condition to fight, but would offer to Britain an entrance into Germany and any land support it could muster. The German colonies, having been reinforced to capture those of France following the war, are able to quickly clamp down on Britain's northern colonies, while Namibia is captured by South Africa. Germany invades Belgium, driving many Belgians to flee to the Netherlands. The Ottomans find themselves in a dire situation as Bulgaria enters in on the side of Britain for claims to Istanbul. However, quickly German troops begin advancing and link up with soldiers in remaining occupied regions, bringing France under total German occupation. As Anatolia was converged upon by Britain and Bulgaria, so would Germany call upon the old Sino-German alliance to repel the Japanese from Manchuria. Sternberg and the Mongols had managed numerous successful raids against the Japanese army, however simply didn't have the capability to invade their islands, leaving the coast a disputed territory that the Japanese couldn't invade, but Sternberg couldn't capture because of navy fire. That was until China supported the Mongolian push and managed to drive the Japanese out of Korea, using a combination of German weaponry, Mongolian tactics, and Chinese manpower. With no means of entering into Europe, India coming under threat of invasion, Japan under threat of total occupation, and the Ottomans already defeated, Britain would need to either end the war now or face further humiliation at the hands of Germany, who had already begun the process of invading Britain's North African colonies. A peace deal is established, borders are finalized, and Germany has shown Europe that it is now the top dog. The Middle East, in the absence of the Ottoman Empire and Franco-British intervention, would divide closely along ethno-religious lines, while Germanic Austria sees annexation to Greater Germany, while Hungary breaks off to become an autonomous state. Later, Germany would incorporate Switzerland into a Germanic economic union to further strengthen the German economic pole around which Europe now spins. The US, because it never entered World War I, never develops anti-German values, and instead comes to embrace them as the world begins to spin on a Germanic axis. Much as American culture and English language was spread throughout the Western world following the Second World War, with British dominance crushed under that of Germany, so would German culture and language permeate France, Italy, Japan, the Balkans, the US, and especially Russia to keep the region under heavy German influence. France and Japan, both being worse for wear, having faced tremendous losses and humiliation to Germany, slowly build greater and greater anti-German attitudes. Around the same period in our timeline, Germany and France had seen significant socialist waves. However, for France, victory in World War I narrowly averted this. In Japan, the belief that the emperor would successfully establish a greater Japanese empire kept the people in check. Without either, both nations find themselves at the tail end of significant war reparations. Pair that with the fleeing of Soviet communists to various parts of Europe, and we'd see both nations succumb to communist revolutions, as Paris had following its losses to Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War. But they wouldn't be alone in this political revolution. As we'd see from the Italian autonomous state of Rome, the rise of Benito Mussolini and his fascist ideology. inspiring within Turkey the rise of a more radicalized Mustafa Ataturk, establishing a new Turkish state founded upon ancestral values of the people and not upon religious theocracy. Immediately, these new states, though small they may be, began expanding into neighboring regions through the use of instigation of revolution and with support from allies within those regions. The Japanese workers tend to get calling upon support from anarchists and communists within Korea, and escaped Soviet communists within northwest China. Rome, through a combination of military strongmanning and diplomatic cooperation, unites with Sicily to re-establish Italy, while France unites with the Netherlands with support from Belgian and Soviet refugees. This would set the tone for the next decade. Civil war in France, civil war in Italy. This would expand into Spain, Portugal, and China, bringing the imperial powers of Germany, Britain, Russia, and Mongolia to the table. Britain, despite its checkered past with Germany, has to set aside its disagreements to stomp out the radical new ideologies that threaten the old order. Britain itself was on an ideological slide, with a communist faction growing within its borders. King Edward and Winston Churchill would be the ones facing down the situation and tasked with solving it. Germany would propose a return to a more monarchistic rule, where the king can operate as more than just a figurehead, through the use of a party which represents him. A king's party, something Churchill had considered establishing in our timeline. The four would unite as the imperial powers of Europe and begin systematically eliminating and cracking down upon the new factions within Japan, Spain, Italy, and France. This would only draw the looser new factions closer together. Italy, Bulgaria, and Turkey uniting to form one massive fascistic state, with regional rule, while an international communist bloc is formed with Japan, parts of Asia, France, Spain, and Portugal. These factions, together, would bring against the imperial order a new war, a war of both might and ideology. A war in which land wouldn't be won through military action, but through the spreading of ideas. And we'd see a race to contain these ideas before they spread too far. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today, World of Tanks. It's an absolutely beautiful looking game, smooth mechanics, hours of playability, and completely free to play if you click the link in the description of this video. If you've ever wanted to get a feel for driving a tank with attention to the littlest of details and historic accuracy, then give the game a look. Every tank plays different and gives you a new game experience. There's really no reason not to try it, unless you have PTSD. Free, fun, and everyone who signs up helps keep this channel up and running. So, with that said, thank you all for watching. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out.